And now on the line from London is Alan Flanagan, a spokesperson for the VICA campaign. Alan, welcome to the programme.
Hi, how's it going?
Alright, cool. Alan, could you tell us a bit about yourself and VICA and a bit about why you are involved in the campaign?
Well, I suppose VICA's been around since, so this is Votes for Irish Citizens Abroad. It's been around, was set up in London in 2011. And basically the goal of the campaign was to kind of help Ireland to get in line with so many other European countries and countries around the world, which allow their citizens to vote from abroad. So I got involved in the campaign kind of towards the beginning, near the beginning of last year. I've been involved in the campaign kind of for the last two referendums. So I've been doing a lot of work from here in London to do with things like Home to Vote and to do with kind of spreading the message back home, but also kind of over here what was going on in the referendum. So I think I was already kind of involved in a lot of what was going on in Irish politics and really passionate about it. And it just seemed like a natural kind of question to be asking is, I care, and Irish abroad, we care so much. Why do we not have to vote when so many other countries allow citizens abroad to vote? That's kind of how I transitioned into working with Votes for Irish Citizens Abroad.
Okay, and there's a referendum happening in the autumn, isn't there?
Yes, so I don't think a date has been nailed down quite yet, but I think it's the last week of October / the first week of November. It was originally scheduled for May, but obviously with European elections, the local elections, and now Brexit pushing further along, I think the government, who are very much behind this, wanted to give it room to breathe. So I think that's why it was pushed towards the end of the year.
Yeah, passing this referendum and the work that you are doing in VICA seems to me to be the 100% logical thing to do, you know. What would you say to our listeners, though, when the argument is made that Irish citizens living outside Ireland don't pay tax and therefore should not expect to be able to vote in presidential elections?
Well, I think that's a common question I've heard coming up, and it's a weird one because we don't have any relationship between tax and voting rights. So it's been an awful long time in Ireland since we've linked wealth to voting rights, and it was not a good thing when we did that. More than 100 years since we had that in place. So that if you said people who weren't paying tax couldn't vote, then you'd be talking about what if people who were in the home, what if people who are pensioners, or what if people who are students. The ability to pay taxes is linked and hasn't been linked for an awful long time to the right to vote. And I don't think it should be. I don't think that it should be a case of if you're wealthy enough to pay tax, if you're in this tax bracket, then you get vote. I think it's about citizenship. And if you're an Irish person living abroad, you are still a citizen of Ireland.
And I'm on, personally, I live in Dublin now, but I'm on disability allowance, and I wouldn't like to be said that I shouldn't be allowed to vote because I don't pay tax, you know.
Exactly.
I was looking at your website yesterday, and you have highlighted the responses to other potential arguments against your campaign and the referendum. Do you want to just maybe list the other potential arguments against your campaign and your responses to them?
Yeah. Well, I think the first argument is always an argument for. I think what we believe is that, and this is especially important because what this referendum is about the presidential vote. And the president, whether it's Mary Robinson talking about the candle in the window of the Oris, or whether it's Michael D just in his inauguration last year talking about how important it was to acknowledge and to work with the global Irish, I think the president means an awful lot to citizens living all over the world, and that's why we're passionate about getting this vote, because he or she is a representative for Irish worldwide. Sometimes, obviously, you kind of mentioned the idea of taxation, which is, I think, as we said, it shouldn't be linked to voting because it hasn't been for an awful long time, and it's not necessarily a very good thing to think of. I think there's other concerns that people have, and I can kind of go through a few of them. But I think this is similar to like any referendum we have in Ireland. It's all about people just talking and looking at the information available and making up their minds based on that. I think a lot of people maybe haven't heard too much about this campaign because it's still 6 months away from the vote, but also it's not as big a one as the ones we've had more recently. But some people, there's understandable concerns people have about, okay, so there's a lot of Irish citizens living around the world. What might there be issues about the numbers kind of swamping the vote, something like that. But the nice thing about this, what we're doing or what we're hoping to do in Ireland, is that so many other countries have done before. So there's 34 of the European countries that allow voting rights either for life or for a good extended long term. Like it's 15 for the UK, which I think they're changing anyway. But if you look at the numbers coming in, so for example, so if you look at Canada, which is an overseas population of 2 million, from that they have 15,000 on the register, and I think in in an election a few years ago, 11,000 of them voted. So we're taking these huge numbers, and there are a lot of Irish people living abroad, but in practice it tends to be people who are particularly interested, passionate and knowledgeable about Irish politics who are going to be voting in these elections. So numbers-wise, we can just look at what's happened before and say, well, with all this data from all these other countries, this issue hasn't come up, and it would be very, very unusual for it to pop up for Ireland. I think you hear as well about the idea of kind of that the overseas electorate is kind of this single body that will vote a certain way, and that way will be different how Irish people would vote. When in truth, I mean, like, citizens living abroad is everything from a student who's been studying in the UK for 2 or 3 years to someone who moved away 40 years ago, to someone who's had the people have had different life experiences, live in different parts of the world, who come back 10 times a year, haven't been back in years. The overseas electorate, like the Irish electorate, is varied, and that's kind of borne out in other countries, is that they're seeing that basically the overseas population tend to vote within a few percentage points of how the electorate back home would vote. And one thing I actually think that's really nice about the idea of citizens abroad being able to vote is that we bring other experiences. We bring the experience of having left, which is such an important part of Irish culture. And having that experience of other countries, other cultures, other lives is something that can be really helpful for the electorate. And it's so connected to the role of president, which is a global role, as the president himself and other previous presidents have said many, many times before. So those are a couple that kind of tend to pop up. But I think, like I said, the handy thing is this happens in so many other countries that we just look at the data from there.
I studied in college in Wolverhampton for a year about 15 years ago, and I was there for 9 months, so I got a lot of experience out of that as well. I love England. You're saying that a date hasn't been set for the referendum yet. What I find interesting as well, which is going to be great, I think, if it's passed, citizens in Northern Ireland, because they're actually included for being abroad, aren't they, at the moment?
Well, so the definition would be that, like, non-resident citizens. So basically, I think abroad has been used as a shorthand, but obviously if you're not around, you're not abroad. But yeah, so our campaign has always been for any non-resident Irish citizen to be able to have a vote, and this year we're looking at the presidential elections, obviously. That would apply to people from Northern Ireland, which would be in line with the Good Friday Agreement and kind of makes sense. The Irish citizenship is part of the structure of Northern Ireland, and I think it's entirely fair. And again, it comes back to that thing of the Irish president is the Irish president, and that doesn't stop at the border. It doesn't stop between two counties. I think that so we've always campaigned for any non-resident citizen to be allowed to vote, and that would, of course, include people in Northern Ireland.
Are you based in England, or are you kind of do you have kind of networks?
So we have I think actually we were talking to someone during the week who's kind of setting up a branch in Vancouver, I think it was. But our base is in London, and it's been a London kind of, just because I suppose, you know yourself, the numbers of Irish people over here, it kind of makes sense to have a base here. And we'll be, I think going into June, we'll be looking at kind of setting up more branches kind of in Ireland, because obviously it's a strange referendum, because all the people affected are all the people who can't vote by definition. So apart from having like branches all over the world, it's important that we have like supporting branches back home. That's kind of what we're building towards as we head towards the referendum. But London it's a solid base for it, because it's so close to home, and there's so many Irish people over here. I know from my own experience, God, my grandparents met in, I think it was Manchester. My dad was born there, and my parents lived in London when they were younger, and my brothers lived in England for work, and I live here. So it's kind of like this back and forth is so common. I think this referendum is a chance to acknowledge that.
I know the referendum expected in the autumn is about the presidential election, but like, would you be in favour in the future of extending it to other elections and kind of referenda in Ireland, like kind of about different topics, or what's the story? I think
the thing to focus on right now in this year is the presidential votes, because that's what we're kind of passionate about. That's what we're thinking about at the moment. That said, I mean, speaking just for our campaign, not to do with this referendum, but speaking just for our campaign, our history has always been to say voting rights, not just in the presidential elections, and that's one that people obviously will have questions about. And again, you can just look at how it works in other countries. So referendums, I think, it's somewhat straightforward in that a referendum affects the country for life. So I think there's kind of a solid reason why citizens who are gone for few years coming back, etc., should have a say in those big long-term changes of the country. When it comes, people often have questions about the idea of obviously representation, the idea of TDs and things like that, and that can be one of the most kind of contentious ones. And this is all stuff that would be well down the line, nothing to do with this referendum in October. But there's other countries you can look at how they do it. For instance, in France, which is what's quite interesting, is they have a couple of TDs or MPs or whatever they're called in France, who are set aside for citizens abroad. So the citizens abroad votes aren't going into the general pool for local elections. They're going specifically for a couple of representatives who represent people living abroad, which actually I think is quite a nice idea, because citizens who are living abroad, like, you might be thinking, okay, I'm coming home next year, but there's not a support system there because we don't have an actual representative. We have a minister for the diaspora, but he or she is not beholden to us because we don't vote for them. So I think that can be an interesting idea about representatives for non-resident citizens. But like I said, that's something that we support, but it's definitely different from this referendum, which is all about the president.
And I don't think it will work. I was thinking of it recently. Say with general elections in Ireland, would you also, like, down the road, be in favour of voting in people abroad being able to vote in Irish general elections? I
think if it's general elections, and what I would say is I would be interested in looking at a system like what I was saying, like in France, where it's representatives who are specifically for non-resident citizens. So it means that I think it makes more sense, because these are people who are specifically focused on these voters who have specific concerns about if I'm moving back, is Ireland in a position where if I need to get things like car insurance, or if I need to try and get a job, is there an eye on what non-resident citizens are thinking about? But also it doesn't mix together with the other votes, because I think it would be, this is me speaking personally, I think it would be odd for me to vote for a Longford representative. And it seems more logical for me to be voting for a citizens abroad representative. But that's, again, it's something that's definitely down the line as a question, but it's something that's very common in other countries. And I think it's worth asking and worth looking at the information and going, well, they're doing it, and their electoral systems are working, and there's 34 European countries who are doing this. How can Ireland make it work in a way that works for us?
And there's an opinion poll out in one of the two Irish papers in Britain this week, the Irish Voice, isn't there?
Yes, yeah. So I think it was actually a Sunday Times poll that was done. Right. That was, I said about 2/3 of voters would be in favour of allowing non-residents to vote in presidential elections, which is kind of works with what we've been experiencing. Is that the more people learn about this, the more people learn about how things work in other countries, the more likely they are to say, oh yeah, that sounds quite logical. And it's interesting because this kind of issue hasn't come out of nowhere. It's not like it's been dropped in our lap suddenly in 2019. This is based on years and years of government research and Constitutional Convention, where I think it was 78% of members in the Constitutional Convention said that they said a yes to should citizens resident outside the state have the right to vote in presidential elections. So that was a case of, as we know with these conventions, we love our convention, that it's a group of informed people coming together to look at how this works in other countries. And again, they were looking, a significant majority were saying yes. That's what we're seeing in polling. And like any referendum, what we're interested in is just people being as informed as possible, looking at how this might work, looking at how it already works in other countries, and then coming to an informed decision. And that's all we want.
Just to talk about between now and the referendum in October, if it's in October, you're saying you're planning to set up some groups in Ireland. Will you be canvassing in Ireland, kind of, because it's people in the Republic of Ireland only who are going to vote on it, isn't it?
Exactly. Yes, by definition, it's only people in Ireland who will be voting on this. We'll be looking to kind of get people on the ground in Ireland. And this thing is that it depends on how large the campaign needs to be. Obviously, with the referendum last year, that was by necessity, a huge campaign because of the topic it was dealing with, because it was such a contentiously fought, I would say. Whereas this is not likely to be as large a campaign, but yeah, we want some definitely boots on the ground in Ireland, and we'll be back in June having an event. It's not kind of set up yet, but we're looking to get people involved and interested, and yeah, just spread the word.
So you'll probably be canvassing or leafleting or doing some kind of campaigning, probably 2-3 months before the campaign, is it?
The same as usual. Yeah, the same as things usually work. Yeah.
Okay, Alan, it's great talking to you. I'll hopefully be talking to you again over next year. Do you want to just give your VICA's contact details around now for any of our listeners?
Yeah. So if people want more information, it's www.vica.ie, which is VICA, as in both for Irish citizens abroad. And then if they're interested in getting involved, they can email info@vica.ie.